is Rachel, and this is the third in our series of 6 videos on starting a backyard garden from scratch. Today is an exciting one, at least for me, I think because I'm a nerd, and this is the garden layout process. So how I take everything we decided that we want to grow and the space that I have available in the backyard that has the right conditions, and then merge those together and figure out what our garden should look like. And a couple of points broadly. First, there is no such thing as the perfect garden layout. You should be suspicious anytime somebody tells you that there is. So it's very much a function of what you want to grow and how much you want to grow that thing, as well as your climate. So in my case, here in Michigan, we are in zone sort of 5B or 6A, pretty cold winters, and our frost dates, the last is May 6th, and then the first is in October. So basically we don't have a spring. We get into early May and it's still frosty. We actually had snow yesterday, not like a light snow. It snowed all day yesterday. And as you can see, it's all melted off now because it did warm up overnight. But we don't really get, I at least don't really get gardening until like mid-April earliest. And then the summer comes on pretty quick. So you'll see in my garden plan a mix of what some people would call spring vegetables and summer vegetables. That's just because I can't grow a spring garden. I just don't have enough time because of my conditions. Now I will probably do a video in sort of late summer talking about a fall garden, because I will try and turn the garden over and do some fall crops as well. But for this particular layout that you're going to see today, it's a mixture of my summer stuff like tomatoes and peppers and basil, and I'm not going to plant all of that right now. But I want to know where it's eventually going to go. So I'm going to leave space for everything and plan my spring crops and my summer crops all at the same time. And then as I go through the video, I can talk about what I'm going to plant first and what I'll plant later. But I do think it's important to think about your garden holistically with all of your crops that are going to be in the ground at the same time, just so you don't have any kind of unpleasant surprises later. So this is going to be fun. I'm going to lay it out on graph paper and show you how I think through the process of creating microclimates that each of the plants needs so that they can grow successfully, and then what I'm going to use in terms of trellising and some vertical stuff as well. All right, so let's get started. Let me show you how I laid out our garden, just using some simple graph paper here to keep it all to scale. So just for those of you that are doing this in some detail, each of these squares is going to represent about 6 inches as I draw this out. And so when you start thinking about raised beds for our garden, they make a ton of sense. We have heavy clay soil. I'll try and do some kind of mason jar soil test so you guys can see visually what I'm talking about when we do our soil video. But for now, just trust me that we have really, really heavy clay-laden soil and it doesn't drain well. And by building these raised beds, we can make sure that the plants have a fighting chance. They'll get better drainage, they won't drown, and the roots won't be sitting in standing water. It also allows the ground to warm up a little bit faster. We had snow yesterday, as I mentioned. It stays really, really cold here. And so having the beds raised up above the ground means that, the warm air can get to them faster, the sun can hit them in the morning, and you just get warmer soil. It's just a little bit better all around for everybody. So in our case, it's also pretty efficient. I can get about 3 feet or about a meter in between these beds, and the 4-foot dimension with 3 feet in between. All of this means I really efficiently use the 10 feet by 20 feet that was available. This ends up being 19 by 11 feet roughly. 6 meters by 3 meters we had to work with. And then dimensional lumber we have on hand is 8 feet long. So I can take a piece and cut it in half, and that gives me my 2 4-foot lengths, and then I can use 2 full lengths of wood for the long sides. So this is drawn with north facing up, and in my case, the sun is going to be coming from the south because we are in the northern hemisphere. And if you're in the southern hemisphere, just invert that. But so as I talk things through, I'll refer to everything where the sunny side is really the south, and the shady side is going to be up on the north. So all in, these beds all get pretty decent sun throughout the day. It doesn't make a huge difference, but you'll start hearing me talk about it with these microclimates here in a sec. So microclimates, let's take the plants that I want to grow and I plot them against 2 dimensions. And the vertical here is height. So how tall does this get? Can I grow it on a trellis? The horizontal is going to be sun requirements. So starting all the way over here on the right is our 8 hours of sun. So 6 to 8 hours of sun is considered
full sunlight. I really try and get 8 hours, and I should be able to get it. I call these the sun-seeking plants. A lot of times this is your fruiting plants, so a plant where you eat the fruit. And if you don't get a full 8 hours, you're not going to have as good of a crop. You'll get something, but the more sun you can give them, the better. So I call those our sun-seeking plants. And then the kind of middle category here is moderate sun. And these are plants that if you gave them 8 hours, they would be perfectly happy with that. But they'll get by with less, say 5 to 6. So if these guys get 5 to 6 hours of sun, they're just fine. And then all the way at the other end, we have our cool down plants, is what I call them. And these are these are plants that over about 75 Fahrenheit, they're going to bolt, they're going to try and set seed, changes the flavor, and it's not really that good anymore. So those are the ones where I actually try and give them a little bit of shade in the heat of the summer. Now let's plot what we said we were going to grow against these dimensions and figure out what kind of microclimates I need and sort of what roughly proportionally I need to do. So starting up here with my trellis crops, I have a lot of things in the sun-seeking category. So I've got tomatoes. I want to grow a lot of different tomatoes this year. I've got watermelon that I'm trying to grow, as well as a kind of cantaloupe. I have cucumber. All of these things need a trellis and full sun. I would say, my beans are up there as well. So those kinds of things you're going to want to grow in a trellis and full sun. Squash is another full sun plant. Peppers is a full sun plant. Basil is as well. And that's one where you aren't growing the fruit on that one, but if you give it full sun, you just get a much better crop of basil. So I treat it kind of like the fruiting crops. Then I've got kind of down here at the cool down section, I love salad greens. I'm going to try and grow a bunch. So lettuces, some spinach, and I mentioned in the what to grow thing, that's not exactly practical for me. I have to create shade for them, but I can do it. And then in this middle category, there's a lot that I like to grow in this category. So kale, broccoli, a lot of your brassicas go in here, rapini style broccolis as well. And then things like Swiss chard, which isn't a brassica, but it's a beet family, but it kind of needs the same treatment. So beets, same deal, and carrots. And these plants up top are leaf plants. And when you're not eating a fruit, you're eating a leaf. You can get away with a lot less sun. So that's why these guys are a little bit easier to grow. Similarly, the beets and carrots, because it's a root that you're eating and not fruit, they need a little bit less. And then all these guys, your fruiting stuff, definitely you're going to want that full sun. And then I'll go ahead and put Malabar spinach on here. That's going to grow on a trellis as well, but it is a leaf crop and it's not a fruit. And so again, if you gave it 8 hours of light, you'd be fine, but it doesn't need a full 8 hours. And so as we think about what goes where in the garden, we can get away with that one getting a little bit less light. So back to our beds. Okay, how do I kind of now map those microclimates against these beds? And I would say that normally when you have a trellis, people would tell you to put it, in my case, on the north side of this particular raised bed, because otherwise it's going to cast shade, and we don't want shade normally. In my case, I actually kind of want some shade. And so if I put it on the south side of a couple of the beds, it creates more shady conditions. And so I'm going to go ahead and violate that whole rule that you're not supposed to put trellises on the sunny end. And I'm going to put them kind of over this walkway in the middle. And a little bit of the logic here is I've also got decent light all around. I've got a little bit of shade from the west, but generally I'm not too worried about shading things out. This section sort of up here, I have some evening sun because I had those evergreens on the berm. But for the most part, there's plenty of light going around, and I can put a trellis, and it's not going to like be the end of the world. The other thing to remember about the sun coming sort of from one direction, let me draw my trellises in here. So I happen to have some cattle panel trellises available from prior years, and I'm just going to use what I've got. So you could also, if you wanted to grow this way, you can get them around here, stores like Tractor Supply and those kinds of places. I think even with COVID, we might be able to place an order and pick it up. But these trellises, I'm going to have them run kind of east-west. They're not going to cast that much shade, and the reason is sun angles. So in the morning, right, the sun is coming in from the east. I'm going to try and show this with my pen, and it might or might not make sense. But you've got your sun coming in the morning from the east, and it's at a pretty low angle. Here, I'll hold the end. So this is coming in from the morning sun, and then as it goes towards the south, it rises up, and then as it sets in the west, it lowers again, which means that this trellis in the middle of the day when the sun's coming straight from the south, it's also at a really high angle, kind of coming straight down. So even on the north side of these trellises, they're still going to get what I would call full sun, at least 6 hours, if not 8. So we've got enough room here to put our trellising crops really on both sides of these trellises. I'm going to dot these in. And I'm showing these spaced at around 18 inches or about 45 centimeters on center. And the reason is where I live and the humidity. So a lot of the stuff on these trellises is susceptible to mildew or other diseases if they get insufficient airflow. And you need to think that through and make sure you don't plant these right on top of each other. I used to live in Atlanta. If I still lived there, I probably would have put these 24 inches or about 0.6 meters on center. But in my case, it's not that humid here, and so I can get away with this 18-inch spacing. If I was in the Southwest or someplace more arid, you could even get closer together, like 12, 15 inches, something of that nature. Now, I want to grow 4 melons, a cucumber, 2 watermelons, and like a cantaloupe type. And those plants are susceptible to powdery mildew. So I like to keep them as far apart from each other as possible. So I'm going to show one in each bed. So here's call it my cantaloupe type. This is going to be my watermelon, one of my 2 watermelons. Let's put, and you can see they're on opposite ends here because as they grow up and over the trellis, that way if they were on the same side, they'd run into each other. Here, they can grow all the way across and not touch one another. Similarly, on the other side here, let me show my cucumber in one corner and then the other watermelon down here at the end. And this puts my melons as far apart from each other as possible and gives them a lot of room to grow. So if one of them does get a bit of powdery mildew, hopefully it won't immediately spread to all of them. And I'll kind of pause on the trellis plants for a minute. I want to walk through in more detail how I do that at the end. But for now, let me move on to the rest of my beds and how I lay them out. So the full sun-loving crops really should go somewhere in one of these 2 bottom beds. This is the south where you get the most light. I'll just work, I think I'll go left to right here. And so starting with squash, we grow 3 squash plants for our family. That's a lot. Most people would not grow that many, but we eat a lot of it. And they need about 2 feet on center, which means in kind of half a bed here, I can grow, say, 3 squash. And I'll prune them and I'll stay on top of it. And so it's kind of dense spacing. Then I've got a lot of things that need sort of a 1 foot spacing, which is 30 centimeters. Trying to remember to get my metrics in here. So I'm going to use this to grow 8 peppers. And the reason is peppers aren't especially productive, so I kind of need a lot of them to produce what I want to grow for the family. So we're going to do a mix of different sweet peppers, some traditional bell peppers, some Italian frying types. And then up here, I'm going to put my basil. And I'll do probably 2 Italian types to get some pesto, and opal basil for some color, and then maybe like a Thai basil. And the reason I like to put the basil up at the top here is that basil at the end of the season, when I'm done growing it and getting a crop, normally throughout the season as I'm growing it, I actually will pinch off the flowers and prevent it from setting flower. But at the end of the season, I will go ahead and let them set flower. I'll let them bolt, so to speak. And they are amazing flowers for pollinators, and it'll attract the pollinators to the squash, to the peppers, and also to everything growing on those trellises, because as you remember, those are our fruiting vegetables and they need some pollination. So putting the basil kind of centrally there is the reason, pollination is the reason that I put them there. And then moving over to this bed, it also gets a lot of light. So I'm going to go ahead and put some room down here for a strip of my root vegetables. So my beets and my carrots, they get plenty of light down here. The sun's coming in from the south, and they appreciate that, so I'll kind of tuck them in here. But then the rest of these beds, I'm going to go ahead and dedicate to my Brassica family. So kale, broccoli, rapini types. I love these. I grow a lot of them. The challenge is they attract cabbage moths, and I've had years where my plants got just pretty much decimated by cabbage moths, even with going out and hand picking them off, and my 5-year-old loves stomping on them. Even with that, like one option is to spread them around. I've got 3 beds. I could theoretically scatter them around in here and try and intermix them and sort of confuse the pest, so to speak. But I just grow so many of these that I'm going to attract them even if I spread them around. It's just too high a percentage of the total. So what I do instead, I leave about, 9 inches, about 20 centimeters here, that's left open for these vining crops to get up and over this trellis. But then beyond that, I'm just going to cover the bed with insect netting, floating row cover. And the reason is it lets me just plant these things in a big block, cover the whole thing with insect netting, and not have to worry about the cabbage moths, and just kind of concentrate it all in one place and protect it. Now, you can see this means I'm covering the beets and the carrots as well. But if you remember, they don't need a full 8 hours. And so they're getting all this nice southern light. And even though there's row cover, there's going to be plenty of light getting through there for these beets and carrots. They're still going to be just fine. So let me take the rest of this bed and break it up and talk about what I'm going to plant. So with the space that's left, normally for things like kale, broccoli, or rapini, I try and plant them, if it was a grid, it'd be like 15 inches on center. In this case, if I break up the bed into, I'm going to do roughly sort of, 9 pieces on each side and then half again, 18 plants. I'm going to end up with kind of a 12-inch by 18-inch spacing there. And that will be enough for them to get what they need in my experience. It kind of just play with what you've got. But for what I have, I think I can fit a total of 18 plants in this 4 foot by 8 foot bed after I subtract the space for the beets and the carrots and the trellis crops here. So let's just say that this entire thing is going to be a combination of broccoli, rapini, and in my case, I'm going to do half purple sprouting broccoli and half spring rapini. So 9 plants of each. Same thing up here. Let me break this into sort of thirds and thirds again. Trying to eyeball this on the grid paper and then cut that in half. And that gives me 18 plants up here as well. A little bit more spacing here because I don't have to leave room for the beets and the carrots. And I'm going to use this whole thing for kale. So I have 2 types. I have a scarlet kale and a Scotch curly kale. I'll probably plant them in a grid. Same with the broccoli and the rapini. Just plant them in a grid. It gives some nice visual order, although it's going to be all covered with insect netting, so I'm not sure the visual order even matters, but at some point, if I ever look at it, it'll be nice and gritty and fun. So over here, top left, this was our shadiest bed, right? It gets that evening shade from the west, and it's going to get a little bit of shade from the trellis. So this, I have room for my salad greens, and I'm going to go ahead and put in roughly 5 rows on each side, where each of these is, a bit less than 4 feet long, since the whole thing is an 8 foot bed. And that gives me room for a 3 or 4 inch wide row with 3 or 4 inches in between. Because I like my visual order, as mentioned, kind of an anal retentive garden layout here, I'm going to put the spinach in kind of A-B spacing here. So it's like lettuce, spinach, lettuce, spinach, lettuce on both sides. It's a lot of spinach, but it lets us pick them as baby spinach or let them grow up. And then I'm going to do a big mix of different lettuce greens. So this year we're going to grow Vit Mash. I'm going to grow Lola Rosa, which is more of a purple leafed. I'm going to grow Little Gem, which is like a little tiny butterhead lettuce. Just a mixed salad bowl blend from M.I. Gardner. I highly recommend his seeds if you can get them. And then I have arugula that I want to grow. We like the spiciness of it. It's really quick crop, matures really fast. And then bronze mignonette lettuce. And these together are a nice variety of maturity dates, leaf shapes, bitter greens, sweet greens, different colors. So we should get a lot of nice salad greens. Now, we've got the evening shade coming in. We've got the trellis casting a little bit of shade. So hopefully, even though this is a spring crop and I'm putting it in with the rest of my summer stuff, hopefully they'll do okay. Now, wanted to talk through the trellis logic and what I put where on the trellis. So already went through the melons. But here's what I want to grow this year on that trellis, right? So the 4 melons, which we already talked about, check. And then I've got a combination of other things I want to grow. I've got 20 spaces left. So on that, I have 2 cherry tomatoes that I wanted to grow, a yellow pear and a red cherry, 2 paste tomatoes. I'm going to do, I think, a Roma and a San Marzano. I've got 4 Malabar spinach and 4 beans planned. I think those will give me plenty of Malabar spinach and beans. And then that leaves me with another 8 open spots here on my trellis, since I had 24 total to work with. And I'm just going to reserve those for my heirloom slicer tomatoes. I'll try and do a combination of different colors and such to give me some variety in the summers. But heirlooms are hard to grow. They are finicky. That's my little star here. They have a long maturity date. They need a lot of heat. And so I want to give them the best possible chance of success. And so that would be the south side of this trellis. And what I'm going to do is plant them as much as I can, which is an H for heirloom tomato, but then I'm going to put the beans in between them. And the reason for that is that the beans set nitrogen or fix nitrogen in their roots, and they really give a boost to the plants around them. So if I go heirloom, bean, heirloom, bean, heirloom, these heirlooms are now getting full summer sun here from the south, and they've got the beans in between, giving them an extra shot of nitrogen. And so they're my most finicky tomatoes, and they should be set up for success with this kind of a layout. So check off the beans and check off 6 of these heirloom slicers. Now on the other side, I can put my tomatoes that are maybe a little bit less finicky. And so I'm going to go ahead and show the CH here for cherry tomatoes. Go and put them in here. Could do a paste. Although I think what I'm going to do is put my paste tomatoes on this bed, just for some simplicity here. And then in between, instead of beans, because I've already used up all my beans, I'm going to go ahead and put the Malabar spinach. And the Malabar spinach can grow, if you remember, like it doesn't need a full 8 hours. And so it can do just fine on this side, interspersed between my cherry tomatoes and my paste tomatoes over here. So tomato, spinach, keeps the tomatoes a little bit further apart too, helps them with circulation of air, and again, not getting things too close together. And now I've got these 2 leftover spots, and I've got 2 heirloom tomatoes left. So I will put 2 of my heirloom tomatoes on this trellis as well, 1 in each bed. And they won't do as well as the heirlooms over here, theoretically, right? They're getting a little less sun, they don't have the beans. So what I'll do is go amongst my options for the heirlooms, and I'll pick the ones that have the shorter maturity date, the smaller fruit, a little easier to grow, and they should do just fine for me even on that side. So just wanted to kind of pull up here and take a look at this whole thing. This is a super productive garden. I've got 3 squash plants, 8 peppers, 4 basil, a ton of broccoli and rapini, a ton of kale. I've got, all my salad greens, huge variety over there. Everything we're talking about growing on these trellises. And when you think about it, all of that plus like the beets and the carrots down there, I'd be shocked if I was going to have to buy at the grocery store any of these particular vegetables through the course of the summer. This is as much as I think my family's going to want to eat of any of these things. And, I feel good about that. I feel like we've got a really efficient use of space here. We've got the right microclimates for the plants, and we should be set up for a nice productive garden. Things like beans, you can just pick over and over and they'll keep producing. The broccoli, the kale are the same way. These salad greens over here are cut and come again crop. So between what we decided to grow last time and how I've chosen to lay it out, I'm feeling pretty good about this garden. And just to kind of think about the broccoli and the rapini, the other thing was this is going to almost be treated like a cut and come again because of the form that we chose to grow. So again, productive garden. And then just going back and our little microclimate concept, right? So these guys wanted some shade. I feel like we give them a little bit of that. These guys need full sun and trellis. Check on that. The Malabar spinach is up on the trellis. The squash, peppers, and basil are all in full sun. And these guys are either, in full sun but under some cover. They should be protected from insects, and they should still get plenty of light. So all in all, I feel pretty good that we've put these guys in a place where they're all going to be happy and they're going to grow well for us. And I'm happy with this outcome.
So I hope that was helpful and even kind of fun. I would say that the approach that I'm using in terms of microclimates and spacing is a universal sort of principle that you can use to apply to your own garden, even if your final layout looks very different, depending on what it is that you might want to grow. Your garden could look totally different than mine, but I'm hoping that by walking through the logic and the sequencing and how I thought about where to put everything, it enables you to kind of think through your own garden in a similar way and then build it up kind of from scratch. So let me know if you have any questions, anything I didn't mention that you think would be helpful, and I will try and address it in the next video. So the next one is going to be on the construction of our raised beds and how we built them. And I described to you earlier why that was so important. We're also going to show how we tried to get better drainage and better moisture conditions inside those beds in the video after that, which is going to be all about the soil. And then finally, last but not least, I am going to show the process of how we planted everything out. It's just going to be the spring stuff for now in that video. and then we'll show how we put the summer stuff in later. And I'll also try and do some short videos on things like, you know, starting transplants and potting things up and putting on insect cover and that kind of thing. So if you want to see more of the full-length videos like this, you can go ahead and subscribe to us on YouTube. We're just going to post these things, you know, once or twice a week as we go here, so you can get notified as they go up, get it in a timely fashion. And then the shorter videos, I think we'll put some of them on here, but we'll likely use our Facebook and our Instagram accounts for some of those. And so, again, if you want to find us over on those channels, you can see some more of kind of the short format stuff. All right, good luck and get growing. Thanks.